Welcome and good now, whenever and wherever this finds you. My name is T.C. Townsend, and I'm practicing making videos. Today's video is a history of the United States starting in 1452 and going through the promise of the future. We cover the tainted history. We have a little bit from Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King. Then we move into the present day with the American Union, and then we move on with the convergence emergence. This video is actually made for a laptop or desktop on full screen, and it'll be a little tough on the phone, but sit back and enjoy yourself, and I'll see you in a little while. What is the Doctrine of Discovery? The Doctrine of Discovery is a series of papal bulls written between 1452 and 1493. It was essentially the church in Europe saying to the nations of Europe, whatever land you find not ruled by Christian rulers, those peoples are less than human, the land is yours for the taking. But the real challenge with the Doctrine of Discovery is the way it influenced the foundations of our nation.
Now, it's interesting because in the legal profession, they will talk about what they call fruit of a poison tree. And the understanding is that if something is created in a corrupt way, it's cursed, it's tainted. And I think that this understanding, that if something is created in a corrupt way, it is cursed and tainted, really applies to the United States. The United States was created with the genocide of Native Americans. It was created with the transatlantic slave trade. And the United States was created in a very corrupt way, and it's maintained its power through war and militarism and destruction.
I think this next talk about our country, about our American way of life, is very appropriate, especially in this time and age. On January 27th, 1838, when he was almost 29 years old, Abraham Lincoln delivered an address before the Young Men's Lyceum in Springfield, Illinois. Abraham Lincoln said this in 1838. It's still very, very appropriate for today.
We find ourselves under the government of a system of political institutions conducing more essentially to the ends of civil and religious liberty than any of which the history of former times tells us. At what point, then, is the approach of danger to be expected? I answer, if it ever reach us, it must spring up amongst us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of freemen, we must live through all time or die by suicide. I mean the powerful influence which the interesting scenes of the Revolution had upon the passions of the people, as distinguished from their judgment. By this influence, the jealousy, envy, and avarice incident to our nature, and so common to a state of peace, prosperity, and conscious strength, were for the time, in a great measure, smothered and rendered inactive, while the deep-rooted principles of hate and the powerful motive of revenge, instead of being turned against each other, were directed exclusively against the British nation. And thus, from the force of circumstances, the basest principles of our nature were either made to lie dormant, or to become the active agents in the advancement of the noblest of causes, that of establishing and maintaining civil and religious liberty.
But this state of feeling must fade, is fading, has faded with circumstances that produced it. 50 years after the Revolutionary War and the establishment of the Constitution, Lincoln is reminding the people of that time and spirit where our base emotions of envy, jealousy, and greed, along with the stronger emotions of hatred and revenge, are set aside to fight the common enemy. Now, 150 years later, we have another person arrive on the scene. Let's see what he has to say.
Our only hope today lies in our ability to recapture the revolutionary spirit and go out into a sometimes hostile world, declaring eternal opposition to poverty, racism, and militarism. With this powerful commitment, we shall boldly challenge the status quo.
Martin Luther King was right. We know his I Have a Dream speech. We know his fight for racial equality. He spoke out against the Vietnam War and in favor of universal basic income. Dr. King recognized that widespread economic security would increase human dignity and build stronger families. He identified these as the triple evils of poverty, racism, and militarism. Martin Luther King was right, and those interconnected evils are still with us. About 1 in 8 Americans live below the poverty line, including 12 million children. Mass incarceration has become the new Jim Crow, with the war on drugs and getting tough on crime disproportionately affecting communities of color. And our endless wars have generated outrageous military spending and cost thousands of American lives, as well as claiming hundreds of thousands more across the Middle East. Martin Luther King was right. These are evils, and we can address them with a radical revolution of values, helping the poor, forgiving the sinners, and loving our enemies. It may sound like a daunting task, but there are millions of reasonable people in our country, and we have a chance in the upcoming election if we join together as a block of swing votes, an American union of voters willing to elect both Republicans and Democrats. When 3.5% of us unite, we'll decide the balance of power in Washington, D.C. We demand immediate passage of a legislative package that ends poverty, ends mass incarceration, and ends the endless wars. It's a blueprint for a better America. Join the American Union. Together we rise. We're not unionizing out of greed. We're not asking for universal basic income and end the drug war because we want to sit in our parents' basements and smoke weed. We're asking for you to fix these problems because tens of millions of people are hurting, are suffering in this country. There is rampant injustice in our judicial system. We have a duty to look out for each other and to fix these problems. You, congressmen, have the ability to act, and we're going to hold you accountable in 2022. You can read our crowdsourced legislative package on our website, anamericanunion.com. Find the 50-plus policies that will improve the quality of life for every single American. Now, this is how things get done in Congress, right? Is you put it all in one big legislative package and then say take it or leave it, and you guys always take it. So we don't need you guys to write the package. We don't need the lobbyists getting their dirty fingers all over it. Instead, we can communicate and collaborate across the country and write legislation that works for the people.
The Blueprint for a Better America is a crowdsourced legislative package written by the people for the people. It contains dozens of popular and common sense policies that fall into 3 main categories: end poverty, end mass incarceration with prison, police, and prosecutorial reforms, and end the endless wars. A few of these policies address the pollution that is harming the planet our children will inherit. The American Union is offering this entire package to Congress and all the candidates running against them. If Congress puts it on the president's desk in October, we can re-elect them in November. If they refuse, their opponents can win our support. Republican or Democrat doesn't matter. A small block of swing voters, putting policy over party, can decide the balance of power in Washington. Political parties work hard to keep Americans divided, using wedge issues like guns and abortion. So the Blueprint also establishes a 10-year truce. By addressing root causes like poverty, we'll drive down the number of needless deaths that they cause. This is how things get done in Washington. Lots of legislation gets packaged together for an up or down vote. The American Union is using the same strategy. The Blueprint is a take-it-or-leave-it offer for all congressional candidates, using our block of votes to back up our demands. 37 million living in poverty, 2 million behind bars, and a military budget approaching $1 trillion is unacceptable. When 3.5% of Americans unionize, we can win a better social contract, one that ends poverty, ends mass incarceration, and ends the endless wars. It's a blueprint for a better America. Learn more at anamericanunion.com. Together we rise.
We can make this happen. How do we sway them? What can we do? We can use our voices to express political will and demand action. We must help our elected leaders work together. It's on us to tell them what we want as a group. Because when voices call out together, their impact multiplies. government can respond to the will of the people, provided we tell the government what we want.
This is exactly what the American Union does with this blueprint for a better America.
That was the reason that the Iron Curtain fell, was that the people just started creating their own system so they could function even if the government failed, and totally ignore the government and act outside the government. And that's probably the safest, the most likely to succeed path to go with the governments as they are.
I'm calling for that. The Citizens Assembly outside of we start out with what Brian did. We get some legislation, we get a bunch of people to agree to it, and then we give it to the legislators and put pressure on them to pass it. And then eventually enough people will understand that we can actually write better legislation than what they're doing. And at that point, they'll just become functionaries. You know, they won't have any real power. They'll just be functionaries.
What's wrong with, I mean, the same way that, you know, the kings and queens, you know, are like just dignitaries, they're figureheads.
Right. They're just
That's fine. Let everybody run. Whoever wants to be our figurehead congressman, that's fine, as long as they're willing to be the people's rubber stamp. Again, because making that change doesn't require amending the Constitution. We can just overlay this system right over the existing one.
Cyrus Jansen is the unofficial ambassador for relationship between Western countries and China. I want to introduce him on this video because I believe he has some important insights from China that will help us grow into this new paradigm.
As an American citizen, I know firsthand that voting for our president by far is the most important aspect of our democracy. It is essentially what defines American democracy. But in China, only 54% of people think elections are an important part of the democratic process. China isn't alone in this category. Japan even scores lower, with just 50% of Japanese viewing elections as being important. Now, generally speaking, Asian countries don't view elections as the most important part of democracy for one simple reason. Many Asian countries use a system of meritocracy. To advance up the political ranks, one must prove your worth. You must provide tangible and measurable results, and you will be held accountable for your actions. This is very different than America, where politicians have almost zero accountability and simply say whatever is needed to win votes and remain in power. Incredibly, just 5% of Chinese citizens believe their country does not have free and open elections, which is quite a contrast to the United States, where nearly 1/3 of Americans feel the election process is not free and not fair. What's shocking is even Russia ranks 2 percentage points higher than the United States. The majority of the world doesn't think their countries are very democratic, even in democracies. Surprisingly, the country that views itself as the most democratic society is actually China. In contrast, in my home country of the United States, the majority of Americans are becoming increasingly frustrated with how American democracy is serving its people. Chinese citizens can't vote for their president, but that's not the most important thing for the average Chinese citizen. The more important question is the government serving the interest of the majority or the minority? Half of the world says their government only serves a minority of people. However, the two countries that rank the highest are China and Vietnam. Chinese citizens can directly see the tangible results of many decades of poverty alleviation. The average Chinese citizen will agree that China's government is serving the majority of its citizens. But what about equality? Does every citizen have the same opportunities and freedoms? The survey indicates that 42% of Americans feel they live in a country that does not have equal rights for their citizens. That score places the United States among the top 5 free democracies in the world, with citizens who are unhappy about equality in their country. Now, why does the United States score so poorly in this category? Unfortunately, it's the very nature of American democracy, which prioritizes the needs and wants of corporations as opposed to common citizens. 72% of Americans say that global corporations threaten their democracy. In addition, 63% of Americans feel the United States government is serving the interest of a minority of people. What's remarkable is this is an increase of 11 points from 2 years earlier. This is very dangerous for the United States and shows just how much public sentiment has changed in the past 2 years.
There is a real possibility of a whole new America being created. But there's no question that the country must be reborn. The country will have to be reborn on new values: kindness, brotherhood, sisterhood, compassion, solidarity, right? We won't be simply trying to fix up and repair the old system. We'll be building a whole new country. We'll be building a whole new country where profits are no longer in command and trade can be done on the basis of win-win cooperation. The possibilities for humanity are massive.
Welcome, Christopher W. Hatton, to speak on the emergence convergence.
Welcome to the Convergence Emergence channel, where we discuss disruptive technological innovation of emergent technologies and how the scope of these technologies expand as they converge together. There are large parts of the population that stay in their development of humanity. And I'm talking religion, power, science, activism. They feel comfortable staying in these human development places. But I would argue that the step to take after activism, you have to go through all of them to get to activism, is integration. So it's not about vilifying other because it takes away from what you want. No, it's about integrating the opinions and perspectives of other so you can further your understanding and be able to talk to anybody at their own level. So when we're talking about integration, we're talking about finding substantive solutions by developing infrastructures and mindsets that are outside of a silo, that can be converged with the silo to widen the scope. The power is within. Yeah, and it starts with finding appreciation in the things around you or in your own experience, and then elevating your emotional state to joy and knowing, appreciation and love, and then following impulses that you receive from that vibrational state. That is the goal here. And when people consistently do that, the world will be a different place. But I believe that there's so much pressure put on everybody by the socioeconomic system we live in that they don't take the time to do that because because most of their time is taken up with how am I going to survive. I think it's going to happen automatically. Like we don't need to fight for that. And there's evidence of it all around right now. It's going to be a lot easier to make an algorithm that replaces intellectual labor than it is to combine a robot and an algorithm that can do physical labor. But that's still coming. White collar is going to get hit hard first, and that's going to be this decade. That brings up a great point. It's kind of the tale of centralized versus decentralized. So you mentioned Google, which is a centralized entity producing all of this benefit through their research and development, and then they package it all together as a product and sell it. State government, entities like Russia and China and the United States, they're doing the same thing, but they're doing it to benefit them so they can spy on others easier or kill others easier or whatnot. Where we have this decentralized group starting to produce some of the same things that are focused to do different things. So instead of trying to spy on you better, decentralization is trying to increase life expectancy. Instead of trying to sell you things better over here, decentralized are trying to use that same data to help mitigate poverty and abolish homelessness. And then the decentralized crowd are still building, products on top of this open source and packaging them for sale. But then there's others that are doing the same thing and open sourcing it. So you can copy and paste that development and build on top of it and or tailor it to your local space. So there's a giant battle going on right now between centralized and decentralized because an open source version of something will take away the profit of your centralized counterpart. We have the cost of raw material for the 3D printers, which will be sub pennies on the dollar. And then we have the cost of electricity, which will approach zero over time. Then we'll have open source versions of most every physical good and service through volunteerism and philanthropy. So we're going to be able to engage with open source versions of virtually everything in the future, which means just by participating in the platform, you're not only making yourself better off, you're making everybody else on the platform better off too. That's something that doesn't exist right now, because that's saying by a person coming in and using the resources of this platform, the pie gets bigger. Where in the scarcity mindset, someone coming in and using the resources takes a piece of the pie away. Right, and that's going to be a large part of our discussions here, is shifting from a scarcity mindset to a mindset of abundance. And that's going to be in every aspect of your life, including material. So everybody needs to, everybody will begin to understand this more and more over time. And I think right now people are taking for granted, but already exists in this realm. Another important piece is thinking outside of our national culture. You know, everybody's stuck within our own national cultures and saying, this is me and this is how I compare myself to people in different cultures. And then you, by that comparison alone, you create a spectrum which is positive and negative. So depending on what your emotional state is, you're going to be focused on either the positive or negative of any spectrum. And that's why I think that when people mention the promise of things, it ticks people off, because they're comfortable over here with their beliefs that that's not going to help anything out.
Well, there you have it. All the way through the promise of tomorrow. Of course, we ended on a note of where we are today, with a lot of people in doubt, people in fear. And yet this video is a promise to a more hopeful, loving, compassionate time. And I do hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you down the road.